Bloomberg Audio Studios. Podcasts, radio, news.
This is the Bloomberg Daybreak Europe podcast. Good morning. It's Wednesday, the 3rd of December. I'm Caroline Hepker in London.
And I'm Stephen Carroll in Brussels. Coming up today, the Kremlin makes positive noises following Russia-US talks, but stops short of backing a peace plan for Ukraine.
OpenAI CEO Sam Altman declares a code red as the firm scrambles to improve ChatGPT, with rivals snapping at its heels.
Plus, a truck's worth every second, while global plastic pollution is forecast to hit 280 million tonnes a year by 2040.
Let's start with a roundup of our top stories.
Talks between Russian President Vladimir Putin and US envoy Steve Witkoff on a plan to end Russia's war in Ukraine concluded after nearly 5 hours without a deal. According to the Kremlin, Putin held very useful talks, but a compromise hasn't been reached yet on the critical issue of territorial control. The former US ambassador to Ukraine, Steve Pfeiffer, says the Russians and Ukrainians remain far apart, and he believes Putin is using the talks to drive a wedge between the United States and Europe.
What the Kremlin hopes is that they can somehow continue to string President Trump along and get him to sort of back away and not continue the kind of support that Ukraine has received from the West over the past 3.5 years, whereas Europe has made clear that it is prepared to continue that support.
Steve Pfeiffer, now a senior fellow at the Brookings Institution, was speaking after Vladimir Putin earlier accused European leaders of sabotaging peace efforts with unacceptable changes to proposals originally drawn up between the US and Russia.
The European Union has reached a deal to phase out Russian gas a year earlier than originally planned. Negotiators representing member states, the European Parliament and the European Commission agreed a deal in the early hours of this morning to gradually prohibit liquefied natural gas imports from Moscow by the end of 2026. That's in addition to a plan to end pipeline gas imports by September 2027. It means the bloc can finally end its energy reliance on Moscow as it looks to the US and the Middle East as alternative suppliers of LNG.
France's President Emmanuel Macron is preparing for talks with President Xi Jinping as part of a 3-day visit to China. Beijing wants support from France, a fellow member of the UN Security Council, in its dispute with Japan over Taiwan status. Bloomberg's Freddie Fulston has more.
President Xi is looking to court Macron as part of a diplomatic effort to isolate Japan's new Prime Minister, Sanae Takaichi. Macron's priority is to address global trade tensions and press Xi to use his influence on Putin to end the war in Ukraine. Keir Starmer's team will be watching closely as the UK Prime Minister prepares for a visit next month. It comes as China condemned the UK's decision to once again delay plans for a Chinese super embassy in London, an ongoing saga in Westminster. In London, Freddie Fulston, Bloomberg Radio.
Now, a tax holiday on newly listed UK shares is set to spark a revival of London's IPO market. So that's according to a top banker who says that plans to exempt stocks of freshly public London companies from a 0.5% stamp duty for 3 years has resonated well. Anthony Gutman, co-CEO at Goldman Sachs International, speaking at the Financial Times' Global Banking Summit, said the move will create a more level playing field than other markets.
OpenAI CEO Sam Altman has declared a code red situation as more rivals to ChatGPT emerge. Bloomberg understands that tech boss sent an internal memo calling for employees to put in a surge to improve the AI chatbot and delay work on other initiatives like AI agents and advertising. Bloomberg Tech Europe anchor Tom McKenzie says the issue comes down to financing.
And it does speak to that funding story, the need to have those deals, the need to raise capital, have that liquidity and raise debt as well for OpenAI, which does not have the balance sheet, of course, of the likes of Alphabet and needs that liquidity and that funding to spend not just on the infrastructure, but to ensure that there is adoption of their products and particularly GPT.
Tom McKenzie speaking there. While Altman didn't directly address his reasons for encouraging the push, sources tell Bloomberg he recently warned workers that Google's AI resurgence could cause temporary headwinds for the firm. OpenAI declined to comment on the reports of the memo.
And those are our top stories for you this morning. Looking at the markets, US and European stock futures look a little brighter. Euro Stoxx 50 futures up by 0.25%. There's been a better session in Asia too. The Kospi index up by 1.1%. Gains for the Nikkei. Actually declines though in China. So those are the outlying markets. Bitcoin has rebounded too. Closely watched story, up by 2.4%. We trade now above $93,000. President Trump says he will announce his selection to lead the Federal Reserve in early 2026. Hugely important for the bond markets. 10-year US yields this morning trading down a basis point at 4.07. And the dollar has weakened this morning. So Bloomberg dollar spot index currently down 0.1%. You've got the greenback weakening against all major currency pairs. So those are the markets.
In a moment, we'll bring you more on those Kremlin talks over Ukraine and whether they're reason for optimism or caution, plus why global plastic demand is set to keep surging. But we've also, Caroline, been working our very human eyes over the writing by our colleagues on AI this morning. Plenty to read across Bloomberg on this subject, as always, but a couple of stories that have stood out for us. One in particular, our opinion columnist Dave Lee has been tackling some of the internet outrage over the re-released Beatles anthology documentary, which AI was used to restore and enhance old footage of the band. Sounds like a great idea, except people spotted things like John Lennon's guitar in one performance appeared to have about 10 strings. Paul McCartney's face didn't look quite right. One fan on Reddit remarking that he looked like a shrunken head. This is... Look, we're kind of back into the territory of how good is this technology really? And Dave kind of digs into the idea of, because there's been resistance, of course, from Paul McCartney in particular to some of the UK rules around copyright and AI, although he has supported the use of the technology to, for example, support the Now and Then song released in 2023 as well.
Yeah.
So the kind of fine line between what's good and right when it comes to applying AI to creative products like music or film, and then when does it get just a bit weird and too much?
Can I say something? I just think this is like bad plastic surgery, isn't it, for AI? If it's wrong, it looks really freakish, but actually the world has largely kind of accepted moderate tweaks, maybe. But does it fundamentally alter, plastic surgery for age and beauty, but AI for history, for your cultural icons? Does it alter something fundamental? I don't know. I feel very curmudgeonly saying that I dislike just remastering of old records. Maria Callas and so on. So, I'm a purist, right. I think.
Caroline firmly in the let it be camp, clearly, on this front. You can read Dave Lee's piece at bloomberg.com/opinion. We'll put a link to it in our podcast show notes as well.
Now, let's bring you more on the talks between the US and Russia over Ukraine. The discussions were described in positive terms by both sides, but it's unclear what progress was made. Tony Halpin, who leads our team covering Russia's economy and government, joins us now for more on this. Tony, hello. What came out of this hugely important meeting?
Yes, good morning. Well, there was a lot of positive rhetoric from the Kremlin side, at least. We haven't had a US readout yet. But there wasn't a great deal of substance on what the two sides might have agreed on and where the disagreements remain unbridgeable, apart from the question of territory, which the Kremlin foreign policy aide Witkoff said they didn't really reach any compromise on. And since that's such a central issue about the amount of Ukrainian land that Russia is trying to take and have recognized as its own, it would suggest there's still plenty of work left to do.
So what happens next then? Does a meeting between Trump and Putin look likely at this stage?
Yuri Ushakov was pretty cautious about that, actually. He said it would depend on the progress that was being made. And previously, President Trump has said that he's not really interested in meeting with Putin and Zelensky unless a deal is on the table. It doesn't seem that a deal is on the table currently. We're waiting still to see what Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner report back to President Trump and what President Trump has to say about the meeting. It was a fairly lengthy one, 5 hours. But so far, at least, nobody's talking about any kind of renewed summit between Putin and Trump.
So where's Ukraine in this? Ukrainian president saying that he is ready to receive all signals from the talks. How much say does Ukraine have in these conversations?
Yes, it's a tricky one. I mean, let's not forget, Ukraine is the victim in this war, right? They're the ones that were invaded by Russia. It's their sovereign territory that US and Russian negotiators were discussing yesterday in carving up. That's made it very difficult for Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky. Ukrainian negotiators were in Florida at the weekend talking to the US. The US was trying to shape the peace plan ahead of the meeting with Putin yesterday. But Zelensky's leverage is pretty limited with the US, and he's very reliant on European support really to kind of back up the positions that he's taking and his efforts really to restrict the amount of Russian demands that are being made upon him.
And there was some saber rattling from Vladimir Putin as well going into these talks. These comments reported that he wasn't planning to go to war with Europe, but if Europe suddenly wants to go to war and starts one, we are ready right now, is what he's reported to have been said. How should we be reading those comments in the context of the talks that were about to happen at that stage?
Yes, I think at some level this is basically just high-level trolling by Putin. I mean, his whole strategy at the moment is to basically restrict discussions about the outcome in Ukraine to Russia and the US, and to sideline Europe and to cast it as not serious. So he wanted to show really that, you know, if Europe's saber-rattling about war with Russia, he doesn't regard that as serious because, let's face it, Russia's one of the world's biggest nuclear powers. And as he said, you know, there wouldn't be anybody to talk to if war really did escalate between Russia and Europe. And so this is part, I think, of his strategy to say that the future of Ukraine is a matter between him and Trump, and Europe should just butt out, really.
Yeah, well, let's see what emerges then on the US side. We did hear from Marco Rubio, an interview with Fox News, saying that trying to end the war in a way that protects Ukraine is the US goal. So we've had that so far. Tony, thank you so much for being with us. Tony Halpin leads our team covering Russia's economy and government, talking about those talks on Ukraine. Stay with us. More from Bloomberg Daybreak Europe coming up after this.
The global production of new plastic is set to increase by 52% by 2040, overwhelming waste management systems. That's the alarming finding from a new report from the American NGO Pew Charitable Trusts. Our reporter Tiwa Adebayo is with us for more on this story. Tiwa, what does this research say about our use of plastic in the future?
Well, I've been poring over this research and our great piece about it on the terminal this morning, and in short, from reading it, it seems like things are about to get a lot worse, unfortunately. I mean, we've known for a while now that plastic isn't great for our bodies, it's not great for the planet, but this report shows that there's clear evidence that it's clogging beaches and oceans, and also that microplastics are entering our bodies and harming our health. And despite this, what is striking about these findings is that we are still continuing to produce plastic at accelerating rates. And because of that, one of the key findings that's exposed in this report is that global plastic pollution will hit 280 million metric tons per year by 2040. That's a dump truck's worth of plastic every second. Global production of new plastic is set to increase by 52%. That's twice as much as waste management systems are increasing to deal with it. So it's quite a staggering amount, but there are also some interesting insights here about the future, especially when it comes to international cooperation. So the report talks about how in August there were talks to forge a sort of international treaty to kind of rein in plastic pollution. But it was blocked by countries that produced the majority of the material that would have been blocked in those proposals. So it seems like the outlook here is pretty bleak, all things considered.
Yeah, sounds absolutely grim. The consequences of increasing plastic use, that the research also describes some of those, sounded quite alarming.
Yeah, there are some pretty big consequences, and it's great that this report it's kind of a hybrid. So you can see current data from recent research, but then it puts that into a model which helps to predict outcomes under different policy scenarios. And included in that are some of the worst case scenarios. So, for example, there are about 16,000 chemicals in plastics. And out of those, scientists think that about a fourth could be harmful to our health. There are also some big environmental risks. So under the current trajectory, plastic-related greenhouse gas emissions are expected to surge by 58% a year. And that means that if plastic production were a country, it would be the third largest emitter of gases like carbon dioxide in the world. But what is interesting as well here is that Pew has done some pretty detailed modelling about those consequences. And I think for me, the most striking of those is that the authors estimate that the world's population would lose 5.6 million total years of healthy life in 2025, and that's 9.8 million years in 2040. So, I mean, I suppose the biggest impact or the biggest consequence that comes out of this is that impact on or the shortening of human life that could come out of this plastic production.
And Tiwa, what solutions do the researchers from Pew offer?
Well, actually, they don't think it's some sort of innovative new solution or invention. They actually say that countries and communities already possess the tools to reduce the manufacture and the use of plastic quite greatly. They are suggesting things like better product and packaging design, and also investing in the infrastructure to support recycling so that we don't always have to produce new plastic products. There's also policy solutions, so ending subsidies for plastic production and also expanding waste collection. But coming back to that gloom we talked about in the original forecast, they do concede that microplastics will be harder to control.
This is Bloomberg Daybreak Europe, your morning brief on the stories making news from London to Wall Street and beyond.
Look for us on your podcast feed every morning on Apple, Spotify and anywhere else you get your podcasts.
You can also listen live each morning on London DAB Radio, the Bloomberg Business app and Bloomberg.com.
Our flagship New York station is also available on your Amazon Alexa devices. Just say, Alexa, play Bloomberg 1130. I'm Caroline Hepker.
And I'm Stephen Carroll. Join us again tomorrow morning for all the news you need to start your day, right here on Bloomberg Daybreak Europe.